Hi everybody, so it's Coach Red here, and so we're going to finally put everything together that you've learned about trig graphs, translating trig graphs. So we're going to look at the function y equals a sine b, parentheses, x minus c plus d. Now each of these values, this is the structure of the sine function, each of these values does something to the graph. I want you to think really hard before I tell you what they do. All right, so a tells me its amplitude. Now remember, the amplitude is half the distance between the maximum and the min. Now remember, A could also tell me if it's being reflected. So if A is negative, it's going to flip that whole graph, reflect it over the x-axis. All right, the B gives me my new period. Remember, the period is how many times the graph occurs, right? One full cycle of the graph, okay? C tells me my phase shift, which is the horizontal shift left and right. And D gives me my vertical shift, up or down. Now, it's important to recognize that all of the functions that we've worked with this year, from linear, quadratic, to square root, they all went through something like this. We might not have called it an amplitude, we might not have called it a period, but we did move things left and right, we did move them up and down, we did stretch them vertically and horizontally, and we did make them like move around, right? So that's all we're doing when we're translating or transforming a graph. All right, so let's put this 5-step process together. This is the 5-step process. We've gone in piece by piece, we're gonna put it all together. All right, so here we have y equals 2 sine 3x minus pi plus 1. The first thing I'm going to do, no matter what, is I'm going to factor out the 3. Okay. So now I've got my A, my B, my C, and my D. Okay, so I want to go through each process. First, find your amplitude. So in this case, my amplitude is 2. Okay, next, my period. So 2 pi over 3 is my period. After that, we want to find our quarter period. The quarter period helps us understand clearly what the 4 symmetrical pieces of this graph, where they're going to occur. So we're going to multiply 2 pi over 3 by a quarter, by 1/4. Giving us 2 pi over 12, simplifying to pi over 6. Okay, so that means every pi over 6, I'm going to have a change, okay? My phase shift. So now this is going to the right, pi over 3. Why right? Well, because it's minus, it's always going to be counterintuitive, the opposite direction of whatever that sign is. Okay, now you want to make sure the quarter period and the phase shift have the same denominator just for ease. So we would make pi over 3 2 pi over 6. Remember, that becomes like our new starting point. It's like where the graph kind of moved to, okay? And then our vertical shift is going to go up 1. Okay, so when we graph, though, we want to be really careful here. So actually, let me get my y-axis going here. All right, my vertical shift is what you have to do first. Remember, we always have a midline for sine and cosine at 0. So we have to move our midline up 1 unit. So I'm going to go here to 1, and I'm going to put a dotted line because that midline is kind of like this hidden line that I'm just going to use to help me graph. So I'm going to dot it. You could dash it, but just remember, that's my midline. And here I'm going to label it for us. I'm going to call it our midline. Okay, from the midline, you want to go up 2 and down 2 using your amplitude. So we've done our vertical shift, now we use our amplitude. So up 2 is going to put me at 3, and down 2 is going to put me at -1. So now from the midline, you can see I'm going up 2 and I'm going down 2, and that's why the amplitude is 2, because it's half the distance between the maximum and the minimum of the graph. Okay, so now I go to my phase shift. So 2 pi over 6, which is pi over 3. Okay, and I'm going to go another pi over 6, which is going to put me at 3 pi over 6, which would be pi over 2. 4 pi over 6 would be 2 pi over 3. 5 pi over 6. And 6 pi over 6 would be pi. I'm going to stop there because I have my 1, 2, 3, 4 nice units. Okay, now this was 2 pi over 6. I'm going to go back 1, so I'd be at pi over 6, so maybe right about here. And then back at 0, and then negative pi over 6, negative pi over 3, negative pi over 2, and negative 2 pi over 3. Now, I was simplifying as I was going, but that was my starting point, and I just kept adding pi over 6 to it and simplified as I went. Okay, so remember, that's my new starting point. Sine starts at the midline, so I'm going to start right here. Then I'm going to go up to my amplitude at pi over 2, so I'm going to go up to 3. Then I'm going to go back to the midline at 2 pi over 3, down to negative 1, so I can see that negative, and then back up to the midline at pi. I'm going to go in the opposite direction, so I'd be down at negative 1 at pi over 6. At 0, I'd be back to the midline. At negative pi over 6, I'd be at here, and then back to the midline at negative pi over 3. And that looks like, let's see what we got here. Now we got our sine graph. And there I can see 2 periods of the graph. All right, so here's what I'd like to do. What I think you should do for the next one is you should try it. You should try the whole process, okay? You should go through the 5-step process, press pause, and come back, and let's see if you did it right. Okay, so you're back. You tried this. I got an amplitude of 3. I made sure I factored out that 2 first, a period of pi, quarter period of pi over 4, phase shift right pi over 2, so I changed it to 2 pi over 4 to just make it easier for me, and a vertical shift up 2. My midline then became 2, and 3 up from that put me at 5 and negative 1. My usual starting point of 0 for sine moved to pi over 2, so right here at the midline. And I went up 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and 6 pi over 4, and I simplified as I went. And then I drew in my new sine graph. So hopefully that was helpful. Okay, one other thing I'd love to try is I'd like to look at putting it together. So put it together, write the equation given the information. So here we have, it says write an equation. And we're given a sine function having a horizontal phase shift of 3 pi over 5 radians to the left, so it's going that way, and a vertical shift up 4. Okay, so we don't have any period change and we have no amplitude change. So that would give me y equals sine. What would I do? If I want to go to the left, it would have to be x plus 3 pi over 5, and then vertical shift up 4. And that's it. Now, it will get a little harder when you're doing the period and the amplitude changes, but why don't you go ahead and try them and check that yourself on the solutions guide. Hopefully that was helpful, guys. Have a great day.